remain feet off the seats, to respect the presenter and the folks who put this together, which means putting your cell phone away, making sure that they're not lit up, and that you're keeping, that you're paying attention. So I am always impressed with how we are with our guests, and I have no reason to think that today will be any different. So thank you very much. Take it away.
We've all worked really, really hard to get Allied B ready for all of you. We are very lucky to have an amazing guest speaker with us today. She is the program director of the Quality, and I met her a few summers ago at a summer camp, and I can tell you that she is not only a mentor but an inspiration to LGBTQ people all over Maine. So please join me in welcoming Dia.
Is this thing on? Ooh, that's bananas. And this is not a TED Talk. You're not going to learn a thing. And there's no quiz, so you don't need to take notes. Anyways, good morning. How y'all doing?
Good.
Great. I got great. Anyone? Who's feeling today? That's real. I get that too. Yeah, I didn't sleep much last night. That wind was howling by my head and kept waking me and my cat up. I kept waking up with a cat on my head. I thought having a kitty was going to be like fun, and we get to hang out, and all it does is like sit on my face and fart. So, what? You've never had a cat before? Farts stink. It's totally true. Anyways, it's really happy to be here at South Portland High School. Like Blake said, my name's Gia, my pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the program director at an organization called Equality Maine. So I'm happy to be back here at South Portland High School, and thank you again, Blake and the GSA, for inviting me to be here today. This is really exciting. I was not expecting this, though, when I walked in the door this morning. Has anyone ever played a practical joke on you? Like, we're going to have this little event, we'll have two or three people come over, we'll have pizza, and then you walk in, there's 1,000 people there or something. Blake had invited me to come and talk to a few classes about my work, a little bit about my story, and I was expecting to be in a much smaller room with maybe 20 of you. And so I was not expecting 100 or 200 people, so surprise! So thanks for being here, I really appreciate it. What I want to do over the next, 45 minutes to an hour is talk a little bit about the work I do at Equality Maine, and the important work we've been doing for 35 years as an organization. I'm going to talk a little bit more about who I am and what brought me to do this work, which I think is really important. And it connects back to when I was a high school student, just like you. And I think that's going to be important. I'm going to give you some updates about what it means to be LGBTQ today here in Maine. A little bit about language, what the law says, how you can be an ally or a better ally to your LGBTQ peers, and then answer any questions if we have time for that today. Does that sound like a plan? Mm-hmm. You're all nodding your heads, mostly? Okay, cool. Thanks for that affirmation. I really appreciate that. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
So I don't even need to yell. This is bananas. I love that. Can everyone see me okay? Okay. I have the filter on my face, so hopefully I look really soft and my wrinkles are gone and my zits are gone or things like that. That's really cool. So I'm going to start with a little bit about Equality Maine and the organization. Can you go to the next slide for a second? Let me just see what's there. Okay. So like Blake said, my name is Gia Drew. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm the program director at an organization called Equality Maine, where I've been for 5 years. I was a high school teacher and coach for 20 years before doing this job, and during that time, I transitioned on the job, and over a matter of months, went from Mr. Drew to Miss Drew in the classroom, and went from Coach Drew to Coach Drew on the track, becoming the first out transgender public school teacher here in the state of Maine, and the first transgender high school coach in the country. Whoa. sweet of you. Where were you 6 years ago when I came out? That would have been... Actually, I'm going to go back to that story. I know sometimes being first is an amazing thing. If you've ever been first in something, it's usually for a good reason. Like you won a race, or you did the best in your class on an exam or something, or whatever. But being first for me was a little more scary than that. You know, when you're the first who's ever done something, it's really scary. So I'm going to come back to that story in just a little bit. I do want to talk a little bit about Equality Maine. Can you go to the next slide for a second and see where I am? Can you go back to the first slide? Oh, thank you. I'm so glad Blake's helping today. So who has heard of Equality Maine before? Really? You're not just raising your hand just to impress somebody? No, really? That's awesome. All right. Who wants to tell me about Equality Maine? Who's got like a one sentence, 2 words, what Equality Maine does? All those hands went up. Who could tell me? A little bit.
Help youth.
What?
Help youth.
Help youth? Yeah, we help youth, sure. What else do we do? Does anyone know? Yeah.
Create a safe space for LGBTQ plus children and teens.
Create safe spaces for LGBTQ plus children and teens. Awesome. What else do we do? Does anyone else know? Yes.
Support the LGBTQ plus community.
Support the LGBTQ plus community. Wow, these are really, have you been studying? You weren't doing your chemistry, were you? You're going to get in trouble. Thank you for saying all those lovely things about our organization. LGBTQ plus, who knows what that stands for? Wow. Yeah. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, plus. What's the plus?
Etc.
Do you know what the plus is? All the other identities aren't listed in those letters. Thank you very much. We're going to come back to that. Sure. And so Equality Maine has been around for 35 years as an organization. I've actually been on their staff for 5 years now, which has been really exciting. And I do want to talk a little bit about how we got started, because I think it's really important. And so our work for 35 years has been to provide education around what it means to be LGBTQ+, fight for policies and laws that protect our community, and build spaces. Someone said spaces. Building spaces so people who are in our community, who are allies to our community, can come together and celebrate being LGBTQ+. So that's what we do. But how we started is actually really unfortunate and horrific. And so I'm going to give you a little content warning before I go any further. I'm going to talk a little bit about violence. I may use some harsh language, but if you're part of a marginalized community, you're probably used to that. So I'm just going to put that out there now that I'm going to mention some really difficult things. And if that's too much for you, I get it. Take care of yourself. I'm not going to think badly if you have to step outside the room for a second. Okay? And so in 1984, wait a minute, you weren't here in 1984, were you?
No.
No, okay. And I bet you some of your parents probably were just getting started in 1984. And so in 1984, there was a young man named Charlie Howard. And Charlie had just graduated from high school the year before. And Charlie lived in Bangor, Maine. Has anyone ever been to Bangor? Okay, so you know about Bangor. So Charlie, it was 1984, he was 19 years old, he had graduated the year before from high school, and he and his friend were out one Saturday night in July. They had gone to a movie or a party or something, and they were walking home. Not very weird or different than something you would do on a Saturday night. So Charlie and his friend were walking down the street when this car pulled up next to them. And in that car were some younger teenagers. And the younger teenagers knew Charlie and his friend a little bit. And they started calling Charlie and his friend some names. They started calling Charlie and his friend some homophobic slurs, transphobic names. You've probably heard them before, right? The F word, the S word, whatever word, right? And unfortunately, you probably still hear them in different places. Hopefully not here at South Portland High School, but maybe. No school is immune to that. Maybe your parents use those words. I don't know. Maybe you see it on YouTube videos. I don't know. Anyways, so these kids in this car started calling Charlie and his friend these names. And they started following down the street. And Charlie and his friend just wanted to get away from him. So they started walking and tried to get away from this car with these teenagers. The car stopped. The kids got out of the car, started calling Charlie and his friend more names, and started pushing them. So name calling became pushing and shoving. And then pushing and shoving turned even more violent. And Charlie was picked up and pushed off a bridge, where he fell to his death in the Kenduskeag stream below. It's horrific. It's horrible. Charlie did nothing wrong. Charlie was just walking down the street with his friend, and he got attacked for being gay. It wasn't the first time someone who was part of the LGBTQ plus community had been harassed or hurt or killed. And unfortunately, it's not the last time. But in the aftermath of the horrific tragedy of Charlie Howard, a group of people in Bangor said, this is not who we are as a community. This is not who we are as a state. What can we do to make Maine safer? What can we do to make Bangor safer? So we talk about safe spaces. Sometimes it takes pretty heroic things to do that. So in 1984, a group of citizens in the Bangor area, many of them teachers, formed a group to say, you know, we don't want this to ever happen again. What can we do to provide education around what it means to be LGBTQ+? How can we create laws and policies that protect LGBTQ+ people from discrimination? And how can we make spaces so if you are part of that community, you can feel safe and you can celebrate who you are? And that group was the MLGPA, the Maine Lesbian Gay Political Alliance, which is now Equality Maine. So that's how Equality Maine got started. It got started in the aftermath of a horrific tragedy. Like many civil rights movements and human rights movements, sometimes it takes a tragedy to inspire people into action. And so when I think about Equality Maine and I think about the work that I do, I always think about Charlie Howard. And I think about other teenagers who are still being harassed, who don't feel safe at school or at home or at church or at work or walking down the street. I think about that, absolutely. That's very important to me. Because at the exact same time, in 1984, do you know where I was? Take a guess.
Home.
High school. Yeah, I was in high school. I'm that old. You like that? So in 1984, I started my senior year of high school. And by the time I got to become a senior, are there any seniors in here? A few of you? Okay. By the time I became a senior, I was very afraid. I was afraid that people would find out some of my deepest secrets. I was afraid they'd find out that I was bisexual, that I was attracted to boys and girls and everybody in between. I was also really afraid they'd find out that I was trans, that I really was a girl. I was so afraid by the time I became a senior in high school, I became kind of the opposite person. I had built up this armor of muscle and masculinity. You might call it toxic masculinity today. Became a jock, became the most popular kid, tried to do everything right, tried to please everybody. So by the time I became a senior in high school, I was captain of my football team, captain of my track team, I was senior class president, I was the leader of my Catholic youth organization. And with all of that, I went to school every day afraid. Afraid that someone would find out who I really was. Because the few times I tried to show myself to the world, when I was a little kid in elementary school or in middle school or a few times in high school, the few times I showed a little interest in maybe a girl or a boy, or the few times I tried to be a little bit more feminine, I got harassed, I got bullied, I got corrected, often violently. And so by the time I became a senior, I just didn't want anyone to find out. Here I was, the most popular, one of the most strongest kids in the school, and I was afraid going to school every day. And I remember this one incident very clearly to this day. I was a senior, and so it was, by then we turned in 1985, and it was Valentine's Day. We just had Valentine's Day, didn't we? Just a couple of weeks ago. Did you do anything special?
Yeah.
Yeah? Good, okay. Did the school do anything? No? Did anyone send cards or flowers or anything?
Absolutely not.
No? Well, at our school, you could send a carnation to someone in homeroom, right? So during the week before Valentine's Day, during lunch, you could pick a name and you could send them a card and send them a carnation for, a fundraiser. And so that was nice. And so when I went to homeroom on Valentine's Day, someone had sent me a flower. How cool is that? I forget who sent me the flower today, which is unfortunate. It must have said something nice, and it was a pink carnation. I'm like, oh, that's nice. And I'm like, I really want to wear that carnation today. So picture me, and this might be hard, I probably should have a picture of me in high school. Just picture typical Brodu jock guy. That was me, My shirt, my sweatshirt, my jeans. I think I was wearing a white button-down shirt that day. And I pinned the little pink carnation to my shirt because I wanted to show a little bit of myself out to the world. What could go wrong? Right? What's so wrong with wearing a little flower on your shirt? So I pinned the flower on my shirt, and I went to my first class, and no one seemed to notice. Went to my second class, which was an art class. Tends to be safer in art classrooms for some reason. Haven't figured that out yet. You're nodding your head. I don't know why that's like that. Okay. And by the time I went to lunch, I'm like, okay. So I went to my lunch, the cafeteria, and this was not in Maine, just so you know. This was outside of Boston, Massachusetts. It was a high school of 2,400 students, and the cafeteria was intense. And there were probably 600 people or 800 people in the cafeteria, and you had to actually come down some stairs to work your way into the cafeteria. And I remember coming down the stairs, and I could see some of my academic friends over here. I could see some of my art friends over here, just like Mean Girls. Right? You know what I'm talking about. And then I saw my party, bro dude friends over here. And before I could kind of turn away from them and go to somewhere else, Tony stood up because he saw the flower. And he didn't like it. And guess what? He wanted to tell everybody in the cafeteria he didn't like it. And so he called out really loud, "What the fuck do you think you're doing, you faggot?" Really loud. That was really soft, what I just said. Imagine that really loud in the cafeteria so everyone would hear it. And by the time he had said that, a circle had formed around me, between me and Tony and this group of guys. And then he kind of lunged at me, grabbing at my flower, and said, "Take that off, you sissy," and grabbed the flower from my shirt. And as he grabbed it, he ripped it, and in doing so, he ripped open my shirt, exposing my chest and my heart, which was breaking beneath. And guess what I did? What do you think I did?
Nothing.
What did you say? Kicked his ass? Yeah, well, no. Well, all right. So the truth, I did attack him. That's what I was taught. I mean, that's what I grew up with, thinking that was the solution. I mean, I had been picked on a little bit before, and I grew up with 4 older brothers, and I was a jock, and I was expected to fight back. And so when Tony grabbed that flower, I was enraged. And I did lunge at him. And before I really hurt him, because I probably could really have hurt him, we were separated by some very brave teachers or somebody who separated us, and we were sent to the principal's office to explain ourselves. And I remember being in the principal's office, waiting for the principal to show up, and I was just, I still wanted to strangle Tony and hit him and make him feel pain, but I didn't. And Tony was kind of laughing now, like whatever. And the principal came in and what happened, we both explained what happened. I'm seething and Tony's kind of laughing. And the principal's like, well, you're going to have to apologize. And Tony says, all right, I'll apologize. Sorry, I did whatever. I didn't know you get so upset. And the principal looks at me and says, so aren't you going to accept Tony's apology? And I'm like, no. And he's like, why not? And, and I couldn't explain it. It was really hard for me to explain to the principal what that flower really meant to me. That flower really was that girl inside of me. And so I was like, I don't know, I can't accept the apology. So we got suspended for fighting. And I remember my mom came to pick me up from school. And we're driving home. This is how my mom drives. It's funny, I drive like this too now. And my mom looked over at me and said, hey, why does this keep happening? This, of course, was not the first time I'd gotten into trouble. I've been getting into trouble my entire life. I've been fighting and being angry about all sorts of things. Some of them are really small things that would just set me off. But sometimes it was something big, like someone grabbing a flower off your shirt. And it was incidents like that that drove me deeper into my shell. It made me feel horrible about being bisexual and trans. That there was no way I could possibly ever be me in this world. And that's hard. A year later, I came back from college, which was kind of nice. I got to meet some new people, started to date some boys. I know that sounds kind of weird, but back then I kind of looked like a boy, so that was a big deal. But then I came back home to the same friends, the same family, same stuff, and life just was not happy. And that was the first time I really, really acted upon my impulses to do something about it. I really believed by then that there was no future for me, that I could never live on this earth happily as a transgender bisexual person. That I'd become too much of a burden to my family and my parents. I'd be too much of an embarrassment as a girl. And so I remember that summer night where I went to the park and I decided to kill myself.
Oh.
And maybe you've had those thoughts. It's not unreal to have those thoughts. Especially if you're in a marginalized community and you've been picked on and you haven't felt good about yourself. Those thoughts creep in. Absolutely, I know what that feels like. And so here I was thinking about doing that, and I actually tried to do it that night. I remember taking a belt that I was wearing and I made a little loop. And I remember putting it around my neck. And I remember tying it to a branch. I remember stepping up to this little stump. And I remember stepping off. And I don't remember a lot what happened next. I remember waking up on the ground. I don't know how much time had passed. I was very confused. Everything was kind of murky and stuff like that. The leaves were cold. And I kind of stumbled back to my house, feeling like I had failed. Imagine that feeling. You try to kill yourself and you feel like you failed because you lived. Huh? That's a really hard place to be. It's hard to say, just letting you know. That's not easy for me to say out loud. But there were other bright spots in my life, And that was kind of my story for the next 25 years. I'd have these thoughts of being really sad and depressed. And then I'd have these really wonderful moments. Really great moments. Great friendships, great loves that came along in the next 25 years. So for the next 25 years, I kind of had moments of joy and then moments of really deep depression and sadness. And during that time, I really didn't share much about my identity with the world. Maybe a handful, maybe 3 or 4 people knew that I was queer, and in the friendliest terms possible, that I was bi and trans. But I was still so ashamed about what that meant that I didn't tell anyone about that. And I definitely didn't tell anyone about my suicide attempt. I think I had more shame about that than anything else. How would anyone understand that I chose or thought about leaving this planet? It wasn't until like 10 years ago that I even began to believe I could be myself. I was about 43, 42 years old. I'd been married for 17 years to this amazing person. I had been teaching for nearly 20 years and coaching. Life was pretty good, but I was still kind of like sad. You know, and I came to another like roadblock or a fork in the road or whatever you call those things, where I had to make a choice. Am I going to live as myself, my true self, my authentic self, or am I just going to give up? And so, for about 8 years ago, 9 years ago, I decided to choose this other path of being myself. And I came out to the world. And it was really scary. I know I said it was first, but it was really scary. And I want to come back to that in a little bit. So when I come and I talk about my life and my work, and I talk about what it means to be LGBTQ+, I think of Charlie Howard, and that he's not here. I think of all the other young people who've been bullied or continue to be bullied and harassed. I think of the 28 transgender women who were murdered last year in this country. And I think about you. I do. So when people ask me to come visit schools and talk about what it's like to be LGBTQ+ and a teenager, I think about you. And I'm like, yeah, of course I'll come. I'd love to come. Because I think you all can make a huge difference in each other's lives. You know, I think the hardest thing when I came out to my family is they didn't know what to say. And so because they were afraid of saying the wrong thing, they didn't say anything. And I felt so alone. I think sometimes we don't know what to say, or we think we're going to say the wrong thing, so we say nothing. And your silence isn't helping. And so one of the things we're going to talk about in a little bit is how to being an ally, to being a friend, you actually need to do something. You actually need to speak up. You need to move to action. You just can't quietly like posts on social media and think that means you're being an ally. It actually means walking down the hall with somebody. Or if someone says something nasty, you say, hey, that's my friend you're talking about. Or that's my mother. Or that's my sister. Or that's my aunt. And that takes courage. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that too. All right. That's a lot for one slide, Blake. Why don't we jump ahead a little bit? That's me. Oh, that's what we're going to do. Oh, go back. That's the Wicked Witch. She was my favorite growing up. I was totally terrified of her, but also loved her at the same time. All right, next. I told you why I do this work. The basics. Can you do a really quick review? Yeah, go ahead. We went over this at the very beginning. Some people ask, and a lot of teachers ask, I can't understand all the letters of the LGBTQ+, and so I'm not going to try. I'm like, all right, that's cool. And I said, you know, you don't need to be an expert on queer theory or everything LGBTQ+ to be a friend. You just need to try your best. And if you don't know what the word means, you ask. Like if you don't know what queer means, you go, hey, I heard you use the word queer. What does that mean to you? Oh, that's cool. Thank you. Hey, I just heard the word demisexual. What does that mean? I don't know. Maybe I'll look it up on Google. There is Google, you know. You can use it. It's amazing. So a lot of people want to know what those letters mean. I think we went over that. And we talked about the plus, which is really cool because there's a lot more identities that we don't talk about that people want to be seen for. I think that's cool too. Okay, next. What do you want to know? Well, we probably get some questions in here. Why don't you go to the next one? Sometimes I talk to teachers, sometimes I talk to students. Sometimes I do like a pre-survey and people ask me a lot of questions ahead of time. Things like that. So before we go any further, I'm going to take a little pause and answer any questions really quickly. Is there any questions before we move on? Yes?
What
get that question a lot. Oh, really, I do. It's not a strange question. I get that a lot. I don't like talking about my previous name because it never really sat with me really well. It never really described who I was as a person, right? Do you love your name?
Yeah.
Some of you really love your name. That's awesome. Does anyone not really like their name? All right, you got some people raising their hand. You know, so I never really loved my name. I didn't hate my name, but it never really described who I was. And so for me, that name is dead to me. So I call it my dead name. And so when people ask me that, I'm like, I don't like talking about my previous name. My name's Gia, and that fits better for me. There are other people, trans people, non-binary people, maybe chosen a different name, who are more than happy to talk about their previous name. Absolutely. But for me, it never really fit who I was, so I don't talk about it very much. But I appreciate the question. Do you understand why I don't use it? All right, thanks for asking. Yes? Oh, why did I choose Gia? Well, think about that for yourself. What if you had the opportunity to name yourself? Think about it. What would you name yourself? No, I'm just asking you to think about that. I'm just pretending to be a teacher again. Think about that. What would you name yourself? You had the opportunity to rename yourself? So I had that opportunity. I want to pick a new name, so I thought about that. One of the cool things is there was a famous model named Gia back in the 80s. I don't know if you've ever heard of Gia before, Gia Karanji. They actually made a famous movie about her called Gia, starring Angelina Jolie. And Gia was a model who was non-traditional. She was blue collar. She was from Philadelphia. She wasn't glamorous. And she was tough. And I kind of responded to her. And she died really young of HIV and AIDS. She actually was one of the first famous female people to ever die of HIV and AIDS. And I just thought her spirit was somewhere inside of me. And so I chose Gia. And it seemed to fit. So when I said to people like, hey, call me Gia, they're like, oh, cool. Hey Gia, nice to meet you. So that's how I chose it. Yes?
Do you plan on, adopting?
I can't hear you.
Do you plan on adopting?
Adopting what?
Kids.
Me? How do you know I don't have kids?
Oh, sorry.
No, that's right. So their question was, do you plan on adopting kids? And I was like, how do you know I don't have kids? That's a great question. You know, I was married for 17 years to an amazing person, and we decided before we got married, this is probably something you should do before you get married. Ask each other, do you want kids? Simple question. We had talked about that before we got married, and neither of us wanted children at that time. Right now, I'm in a very committed relationship with my partner of 2 years, and they have 2 teenagers. So I'm kind of like that other adult in that relationship, so I have kids around, which is cool. Other questions before we move on to more stuff? Nope. Yeah? Sorry, I have to relay. Someone else?
Do you ever have to come to your partner's children?
Did I have to come out to my partner's children? That's a really interesting question. So I've had a couple partners in the last 8 years. And it was trickier for the last partner because the kids were younger. Yet we both were trans. And we were trying to explain to them what trans meant. Because we both were trans. The new thing, absolutely, it's easy. My partner's queer. One of the teenagers is non-binary and they're queer. So didn't have to say anything about it. So that's that. Other questions before we move on? Okay. I can't, sorry, my eyes are really bad. You good?
2 years ago.
I can't hear you.
I'm the person who changed my name about 2 years ago, and I also happen to have parents who are lesbians, and it can get hard sometimes when people try to use that as a way against me, especially even in my own family. So do you have any ways of how to better deal with that, other than just lashing out and getting upset?
Maybe I don't understand the question. So you changed your name. Congratulations. And you happen to have lesbian parents. It had nothing to do with you, right? They just happen to be lesbians. And so what's being used against you? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I know. That's really hard. I'm sorry that's still happening. And I think the more we talk about it like this, and the more we sort of recognize how important it is to be honored for the names that we choose to use, and to have friends get our back, and to say, hey, that's their name. Stop using another name. That's not respectful. And the more people that you have on your side, it makes it a little easier. It's hard when you feel alone in that space. Absolutely. You know? But I do think the more we talk about it, you know, the more we, I hate the word normalize, but normalize the fact that there are LGBTQ people everywhere, at every level, young people, older people, you know, I think things will slowly. But one, I think, is to recognize it's not about you. You're just being yourself and you're being authentic and true. That's amazing. How cool is that? You know, and I think finding that strength inside will help you be able to handle some of the BS that you're walking into these days, right? And you'll be able to hear those horrible things with a little bit more strength and like, okay, I wonder why they're saying that. It probably comes from a place of ignorance and fear, and I doubt it's very deeply personal about you. It's probably their own shit, right? And I think that's been really hard for me. One of the hardest things I've had to do is to learn how to love myself so I can walk down the street and see people snicker. I remember when I first started transitioning, I would walk into a grocery store or a Target, and I remember like moms would like herd their children away from me, like I was a monster. That really hurt. And so over the last 7 or 8 years, I have found this inner strength and inner peace to realize this really wasn't about me personally. This was about their stuff and their own baggage and their own stuff that they have to deal with. So that's my advice to you. I know it's probably not very helpful, but you're amazing for believing in yourself. And in time, hopefully, they'll catch up to your amazingness. How's that? Okay, cool. Thank you. All right, we're gonna move on. Wait, yeah?
So I was just wondering, is there ever a point where you're not considered transitioning anymore, or you always doing stuff?
Me or you?
Transgender.
Let me ask you this question. Do you think you're going to be the same today than in 5 years? No, you're shaking your head now. Not at all. 10 years, are you going to be the same? 20 years? 40 years? No, absolutely not. I think one thing that we all forget is that we all transition. Each and every one of us is going to change and evolve through time. We're not going to be the same people we are sitting in these chairs today than we are tomorrow, 5 years, 10 years from now. Absolutely. We all change and evolve. Hopefully we become even better people, which I don't even know how that's possible because you're amazing already. But that idea. And so in terms of someone's transition, that's really personal. Everyone has their own journey. And so some people transition and do a whole bunch of things, and some people do, I'm just going to change my name. And that's good with me. And so people just got to figure out what's good for them. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Awesome. Good question. Hi.
Did your partner of 17 years of know any fellow who got fired?
Ooh. Did you hear that question?
No.
No. I'll repeat it because I have a microphone and they don't. So this person over here asked, did my partner of 17 years know? Right? Is that what you said? That I was trans, I'm going to guess. And how did they feel about it?
Did they know how you felt?
Oh, did they know how I felt? That's a really complicated question. I thought I was leaving enough breadcrumbs along the way. I remember when I first met her in Savannah, Georgia. We were in school together, college. And I said, before we get really serious, there's something you need to know about me. And I did. I was very clear. I said, sometimes I like to look like this. But I didn't tell her that deep down that I really was a woman. And because I was afraid of what that might do to us in our relationship, I was afraid that that would scare her away. And so I kind of hinted at it. Yeah, I like to do this once in a while. Yeah, no big deal. And then she's like, really? Don't you want to transition? I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. That's scary. And so that kind of went on for a long time until finally I'm like, you're not happy and you must, and I'm like, oh, you're right. So she knew before me that I was trans and said, you probably need to figure this out because this isn't working between the two of us. And so what we did is we separated, we got divorced, and now we're best friends. Because we're not pretending to be something we're not, which is kind of cool. Thank you. That doesn't always work out though, just saying. We're just lucky. All right, where are we? Click ahead. Climate. Okay, thank you. Go to the next slide. I don't know if you can see that. Some people ask, how many, where'd my microphone go? Right there? Okay, there it is. People want to know how many LGBTQ plus people there are here in the United States or in Maine. And that's really hard to know. How do we figure that out? There's some estimates that maybe 4.5 or 5% of adults say they're LGBTQ plus. And that's on the conservative number. But when we ask teenagers like you, go to the next slide. This is what we find. Who here has taken the Me House Health Survey in school? Hopefully all of you have taken this survey. At least once in your life you've been in public school. You do it every couple years. Usually your junior year and then a couple years before that. About 6 years ago, the survey was asking questions, of course, about do you smoke, how often, do you carry a weapon to school, have you been bullied and harassed, do you drink, how much do you drink, have you ever been in a car, you know those questions. But at the very beginning of the survey now asks, are you gay, lesbian, bisexual, or unsure of your sexual orientation? And 15% of high school students in Maine say they're LGBT or unsure of their sexual orientation. 15%. How many students go to South Portland High School? About 1,000? Just let's pretend it's 1,000. It makes the math a lot easier. So what's 15% of 1,000? What? Oh, yes, your 5th grade math teacher is going to be so proud of you. Yes, 150, at least, right? Cool. The other cool fact that we learned, the survey asked, are you transgender? For the first time ever, are you transgender? Or are you questioning your gender identity? 3% of high school juniors in the state of Maine say they're transgender or they're unsure about their gender identity. You can do the math on 3% of 1,000, right? What's that number? 30. There you go. So if you want to know what the typical high school looks like here in Maine, you have a general idea of what the percentages are in terms of population, which is pretty amazing. I like that statistic. And so when we think about those statistics, I really think about, does your curriculum reflect that? Are you being taught LGBTQ plus history in history class? You're shaking your head no, right? Probably not. Are you learning about LGBT issues related to science? No. Art? Maybe? There was a gay artist once? Doesn't really count. How about in sex ed? Are you being taught LGBT plus inclusive sex ed? Very little. You got a little finger very little, right? Yeah. And so this data is really important. We're talking to educators and administrators about making sure that what you're teaching reflects your student population, which I think is really important. Cool. What's next? Ooh. Unfortunately, when we think about the homeless population in the United States and here in Maine, 40% of all homeless youth are LGBTQ plus. Nearly half of all young people who end up being homeless are LGBTQ plus. Now you're a smart group. Why do you think that is? Yes.
Sometimes when someone comes out with their parents, they're forced out of the house.
Maybe they're forced out from their parents?
Oh.
What else?
There might be like discrimination, like trying to get a job, or like, this is bad.
Yeah, there could be discrimination at all places in their life, whether it's school or employment. Yep. What's another reason why that number is so high? Anything else? Yes. Can't hear you. You're running away. Yeah. What do you think young people are running away from? All sorts of things, right? Yeah. Cool. Exactly. You're all right. So take a look at what their results tell us. Can you show that screen? Why? Whoa. People ran away because of family rejection. Number one. Right? This is like Family Feud, but a really, really bad Family Feud. Like, this is not fun. That most people run away or leave because of rejection, family rejection. That breaks my heart that families are not accepting of their own children. Right? 2, forced out by parents, physical, emotional abuse at home. Maybe they were in the foster care system and they've aged out now. Or financial and emotional neglect. Yeah, you can live here, but we're not going to respect you, and we're not going to take care of you, so you choose to leave. Right? So this is really hard. I don't have any good solutions here. If you have any really good solutions here, and how we can solve this problem, and this is a major problem that we're trying to work on, because we can come to schools, and I can talk to your teachers, and I can talk to your principals. I can even talk to your employers about how they have to follow the law, about being respectful and not to break the law on discrimination. The one place I have a hard time getting is talking to your parents. You know, that is like the hardest place for us to reach, is talking to parents and families about their fears, their anxiety, the misinformation they may have of what it means to be LGBTQ+. Because I think if we had those conversations, we wouldn't have 40% of homeless youth being LGBTQ+. We'd have more young people in school and staying at home. Absolutely. So if you have any great suggestions on how we fold families and parents into this conversation, I'd love to hear your suggestions. I mean, I have a couple of ideas. Invite parents to nights like this, where we openly discuss issues of LGBTQ+, hear their questions, address their fears. I think that might be helpful. And I think if you all, as allies, speak up on behalf of your classmates to your own parents when they say something wrong about what it means to be LGBTQ+, that would be helpful. When you see something on the news that you know hurts, you could say, hey, that's really horrible. How do you feel about that, Mom? So I think it's not just you. I think it's a combination of community members having these conversations, because I think that's really important. Because you all know what happens when you end up homeless. It's not very fun. You know, it's cold in Maine. Last night it was about 5 degrees with a wind chill of -15. Imagine not having a house. That would suck. And so you know what you do? You do all sorts of things to live and survive. You trade things to live. So if you're young and you're LGBTQ+, you're doing a lot of couch surfing from place to place. You're probably trading things so you can have a warm place to sleep and food. And that can turn into all sorts of things. That could turn to drug use. It could turn to trading relationships and sex, things like that. You can be trafficked pretty easily if you're LGBTQ+ and you're young and you need a warm place to stay. And so that's one of the major issues we're trying to address as an organization and as a community. And I can't do that alone. And you can't do that alone. But we need everybody involved. That means you, your parents, and your school, and your church leaders, and your employers, to address this issue. Absolutely. That's why I brought that up, because we're going to come back to that the more we talk about this issue. All right, thank you, Blake. Language. Thank you. Can you go to, I don't know what oh. Pronouns. I think most of you are really good with pronouns. I've heard really great things about South Portland High School, about using pronouns more and more and more when you introduce yourselves. When I introduced myself here, I said, hey, I'm Gia. I use she, her, and hers. I do it all the time. I don't even think about it. Every email I send out, at the bottom says Gia, she, her, and hers. Imagine if all your teachers, do they already do this? Had their little pronouns at the bottom? Imagine that. That'd be cool. And there are, more pronouns than I was taught in 2nd grade. She, and he, and they, and Z, and here. More and more and more, which is really cool. In fact, there are cultures across the globe that have never used pronouns. We just happen to be connected to Romance languages, so we use pronouns. Oh. And so hopefully you're getting more comfortable using pronouns. So I want to do a little experiment with you all on pronouns and names, since we have a little bit of time. I have no idea what time it is, because I could talk for like 10 hours.
10:53.
10:53. Hi. Hi. Someone said 10:53.
Right here.
Yes. Which one? Z, Zier, and Ziers? Yeah. Sure. I'll go back here. Can you still hear me way back here? Really? All right. So Z is singular, right? And that Zier is a possessive his, like them, or him, or her. And Ziers is just kind of the same as theirs, his, and hers. They just go in alignment. It's just another way of saying those things. But there's no gender connected to them. So that's the big difference. When we think about why someone would use they, them, or Z, it's because they don't want a gender associated with their pronouns. He and she tend to have, connections to a gender or a sex. So someone may choose to use they or Z because they don't want to be associated with one gender or another. So they're choosing gender-neutral options like Z and they. Does that make sense? Yes. You're welcome. Yes.
How come the pronouns are necessary if they use they because they sometimes use all the
Why would someone use Z instead of they? Great question. Maybe because maybe they don't like they. Maybe they has a lot of associations, and I know I've heard from a lot of English teachers that don't like hearing they get all upset about it. Not every English teacher. And so maybe they want to use a word that isn't connected to sometimes plural. So some people use Z because it's a standalone, something completely different. And it's actually invented to reflect a non-binary identity. That's probably why. Great question. Excellent. All right. Next. We're going to do a quick introductions with each other for about 5 minutes exercise so you get to talk to each other. Can you go to the next slide? Next one. Great.
Ooh, PowerPoint.
Right? Exactly. So in small groups, I want you to do this. Groups of 3. I want you to say a little bit about yourself. Hi, my name is. The pronouns you use, and this is called practice. And if you don't do it regularly, it's going to feel weird. The more you do it, the easier it gets. And then I want you to think about something. I want you to think about your first positive experience with anything LGBTQ+. Think about your first positive experience, or something that sticks out to you. Okay? Before you do this, let me just give you a practice, a little example. So my name is Gia. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I think my first positive experience with anything LGBTQ+ happened in the 9th grade. Is anyone here in 9th grade? Oh my God, I love 9th grade. All right, so in the 9th grade, I was in Mr. DeRazio's English class. Do you have Mr. DeRazio as an English teacher? No, I didn't think so. He's retired, and he didn't even teach here. But anyways, I really struggled in English. I'm a really slow reader, and I have some processing issues, like reading, hearing, writing. I couldn't figure it all out. But Mr. DeRazio was really cute.
Oh.
All right, hot.
Oh.
And in 9th grade, I had a crush on my English teacher. He had the most beautiful blue eyes, and he had this long hair like he was really hip and cool.
That's the case.
And so he had us read this book called Catcher in the Rye. Have you read it?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. Bear with me then, bear with me. So anyways, because I had a crush on my English teacher, I read the book. And I sat in the front row. And I answered questions. And I studied the night before class just to impress my English teacher. That's pretty pathetic, isn't it?
Yeah.
I had fantasies and dreams that we would end up together if I impressed him with Catcher in the Rye. I was 14. I was naive. Anyways, so I don't remember this book. I totally forgot about it for about 30 years. So in ninth grade, it was 1982. So that's 36 years ago. So a long time ago. 37 years ago. And I forgot about Catcher in the Rye. I forgot about the story. And then, 2 years ago, I started thinking about positive experiences, and I thought of this. I thought of this one moment. I forget the entire book. Absolutely everything except for this one, chapter, or actually 2 paragraphs that I remember now. And I remember that the main character, his name is Holden Caulfield, and he's 16 years old. And he's getting in trouble. I knew what that was like. He had just got kicked out of high school again. And he ends up in New York City.
My place.
And he checks into a hotel at 16. Who does that? Anyways. And I remember he goes to his hotel room, and he has his little bag, and he puts his bag down on his bed, and he kind of looks out a window, and he sees into another window, into another hotel, or another apartment. I don't know if you remember this scene. This is all I remember about Catcher in the Rye. And he sees out into this other room like a middle-aged man. And that middle-aged man is getting undressed and getting redressed into women's clothes. And guess what Holden does? Do you remember? He does nothing. Absolutely nothing. He goes, that's interesting. And then the story moves on. And I think for me, as a scared 14-year-old queer kid, that was the first time in my entire life where I ever saw something remotely like me as a trans person. Not being the butt of a joke, not like a serial killer or a rapist or a murderer. Here was just this one character in a book, and it wasn't a joke. And I think for me, that was the first time I saw anything remotely positive about being LGBTQ+. Was this little bit in this little book that I read because I had a crush on my English teacher. Probably the first positive experience I ever had. And I think I've had many of those breadcrumbs along the way that have given me hope to believe in myself. All right, so you know the instructions. You have 3 minutes to say, hi, my name is, these are my pronouns, and then each of you share a positive story. And go.
Pierre.
Yeah,
It's not even your name. Why you answer? Hi guys, I'm Irene. I go by she, hers, and hers.
Okay, you're not done though. Keep talking. Yo, keep talking.
My first experience with LGBTQ I'm done.
No, you can't be done.
I knew that it was always there.
I actually don't have a good experience
Let's see. Never had one.
because oh, you wave at the camera.
Okay. I'm sorry to interrupt your conversations. You definitely can continue those throughout the day and tomorrow. Hopefully you had a moment to share some things maybe you've never shared before. So thank you for doing that. So for the first timers, how many of you had never shared your pronouns out loud before? Look at that, you survived. Very good. So that's cool. Why do you think I asked you to share a positive experience? Why do you think I asked you to do that? Yes?
Oftentimes in past movie films and just society in general, LGBT people.
Yeah, I think so much of what we talk about is negative about LGBTQ plus stuff that I think it's really important to recognize the good parts and the things that bring us joy, that make us smile, that make us laugh. I really believe that. I don't wish I was not, I really like being trans and bisexual. I don't wish I was something else. I don't regret any of that. People always ask, don't you wish you weren't born trans? I'm like, absolutely not. That's who I am. And so, when we ask you that question, I do it so you can actually share something positive. Two, is most of you, if not all of you, actually had something positive to share with one another. Imagine that. And imagine if we asked this question of everybody in this school. Of every one of your teachers. Do you think everyone would, at least, or most, would have a positive experience? Yeah, and I found that. Over the last 5 years traveling across Maine and talking to thousands of people, the more I ask that question, most people have a positive experience. In fact, they have many. Yet we never really talk about it. And sometimes we do something shameful, is we prejudge people. We think, oh, they're not going to have any positive experience with the LGBTQ plus community, so I'm not going to talk to them about it. And what we just learned is all of you have a common bond or connection in a positive way to the LGBTQ plus community. Maybe you never thought about that before. And I think, and I hope, that that will increase our bonds and connectiveness to each other. That we do have that in common. That you maybe never assumed it before. So thank you for doing that. And continue those conversations. Okay? I know you only have a few minutes to go, so I do need to wrap up. Right? I think I have 5 minutes or so. All right, so I want to tell you one more story before I say farewell for today. So like I mentioned at the very beginning, I came out as a teacher here in Maine and as a coach. In fact, I used to coach against South Portland High School, and we used to always lose. What are you going to do? But I want to tell you today about the first day I went to school openly as Gia, and what that felt like for me. And that was really hard. Where I was teaching, I'd been for about 10 years, and everyone knew me as either Coach Drew or Mr. Drew for those 10 years. And the day I decided to be myself finally, I didn't really tell anybody I was going to do it. Oops. That's a mistake. If I could go back in time, as Cher says, if I could turn back time, I would probably I wish I had some people by my side that day. But I decided that was the day I was going to go and I was going to dress the way I wanted to dress. That I was going to tell people this is who I really am. This is me. And I remember that morning, it was a January morning, cold like today, somewhere around 0 or 10 degrees. And I had to get to school early to supervise the cafeteria for the students who got to school early that morning. So I was supposed to be at school at 7 a.m. And I drove my gray pickup truck to the parking lot. And I had dressed a little bit more femme that day. Not quite this, but something a little bit more, whatever, pretty. And I parked my truck. And I sat in my truck. And then 7 o'clock became 7:05. And then 7:05 became 7:10. And I was still sitting there in my truck. I'd been sitting there so long, the windows had frosted up. You could scratch your name, on the glass. And then it became 7:15. And I began to doubt if I could actually do this. I'd been teaching for 20 years and coaching. And here I was about to step out into the world, but I was doubting myself that I could actually do this. And then I did the most cliche thing in the world. I took a deep breath. And I let it out. And I said, this is who I am. And so I opened my truck door, grabbed my book bag, closed it, and walked across the frozen parking lot with my head down into the school. I cut through the back of the cafeteria into the back where the tables were, and I kind of dropped my bag, took my coat off, keeping my head down, thinking, or imagining there was a giant neon sign above my head that said, "Look at the freak." And even though I wasn't dressed much differently than today, it felt like I was wearing a prom gown, right? And so I kind of shuffled across the cafeteria to the other side where I saw some teachers. And I kind of peeked up and looked across to all the students in the cafeteria. And they were so busy copying each other's geometry homework and texting each other, they didn't notice me. Or they didn't care. And then I made it across to the doorway where there were some teachers I've been working with for 10 years. And they definitely saw that I was different. I wasn't dressed as the typical Mr. Drew. And they kind of looked at me a little bit, and we talked about the weather. Good advice. And then I looked out into the atrium with us, just like you have here. We open the main doors in that little gathering space. And there were about 100 students gathering there waiting for the bell to ring for the start of school. And I saw this one student. Her name was Erin. And I had her the semester before in my photography class. And Erin was a loudmouth. She was smart, but trouble. I think you could picture the type of person. She could make my life hell. And I noticed that she noticed me. She definitely saw the difference in me, right? And then she started whispering to her friends. Just like Mean Girls, right? And then her and her friends started walking towards me. And my heart started to pound. And I got really nervous. And I had a flashback to high school when Tony grabbed that flower from my shirt. And I thought, oh my God, is she going to do the same thing? Is she going to call me names in front of all the students and my colleagues at school? And then I stopped because I couldn't go any further. And she stopped right in front of me. And she looked me up and down. And then she smiled. She said, "I like your boots.
Oh.
They're cute." And then she walked away. Imagine that. Imagine that. After years and years of being afraid to be myself, the few kind words from one of my students began to melt away years of fear. And I haven't looked back since. So when we leave today, what I want you to think about is not my bravery. I was exhausted about running from myself. I want you to think about Erin's bravery. That student who could have just as easily said something really nasty to impress her friends. Yet she chose the opposite. She chose to be nice. She chose to say something nice and be kind. That's what it means to be an ally. When faced with a decision where you could ridicule something or be silent, you speak up and you say something kind. That's what bravery is. That's what courage is. Well, that's all the time we have today. Thanks for coming to my talk.